So today we'll be talking about my homework 5, where I'll be analyzing mass shooting data in the United States and how gun control regulation affects where shootings are and why they happen. And so we'll be doing this through an analysis of 6 different maps of the United States, where we map all of the different shootings out and encode them with color based on their different laws in each state. And so, for example, here you could see that we're looking at background checks for handguns. And so the orange representing if there is they require background checks, and the yellow and the blue if they don't require background checks. And then I did the same for background checks on long guns, and then I did the same for handguns and long guns if you can open carry, as well as if you need a permit required. And so I came up with a very interesting insight after looking at all of this. But before, we'll talk about some of the users' tasks and data. So my users will be politicians and state legislators, specifically those who are in committees who focus on gun legislation, who will be the more specific target users. And then within that, we have 2 different main tasks. So the one would be to determine the areas with the highest number of shootings, and the action would be determine the number of shootings, and then the target would be the U.S. cities and areas. And the second task is to identify which type of legislation is most effective in lowering the number of shootings. So the action there being identify the number of shootings in each state that do or don't have each type of legislation being examined, and the target again is U.S. states and cities. And so interestingly, for each of the maps, I encoded them where you can see the little kind of scale, the gradient. That's for population. And so by analyzing population on top of that, I came up with a very interesting insight. And so the insight that I came up with was that states with less regulation on long guns specifically have more shootings in lower populated areas. And so that's kind of so what you actually see by looking at most of the maps is that most of the shootings are happening in high population areas or around major cities. However, when you look at the records of shootings that occur outside of the populated areas, they mostly occur in states that don't require permits, background checks, and that allowed for the open carry of long guns. I think there may be a few potential explanations for this. First, long guns are more practical than a handgun if you're going to go shooting or hunting. So it's easier to obviously do that in an unpopulated rural area than in a city. And so while the legislation in these areas is more likely lax to allow the average normal person to go just hunting, which is okay, with no ill intent. And that means there's more long guns present in these areas. So it's safer for them to get in the wrong hands and result in a shooting. Looking at the 5 characteristics of an insight, I believe it is meaningful because our politician users, they can have a data-backed reason to reconsider the laws and protect their constituents. So they may not need to take away the long guns, but they may be able to put in place laws like permitting, background checks, so they don't allow open carry as well for people who may not be capable of having a gun, make it harder to get into their hands. I think it does show a deep understanding, because while you could just look at it in a table, it's hard to perceptualize geographic and categorical data like law data without being visualized in a map format. As a result, this insight would be very hard to come by and to understand without my visualizations. I think it's actionable because these legislators in these states could implement better gun laws to keep people safer. It's not obvious because it requires a visualization and understanding of both how handgun and long gun legislation affect geographic location of shootings and an examination of the non-populated areas of shootings. And it is based on data. So that's most of what I have here, and I thank you very much for listening.